We looked at the first part of this reteach 8-2 a couple of days ago. I want to work today on the last couple of problems because this is how we use our sine, cosine, tangent ratios to actually solve for missing measures in triangles. So again, when we're looking at our trig ratios, you want to make sure your mode is in degrees. So you go to your calculator, set that up. You want to set up the equation that you're looking for so that you know whether you're going to multiply or divide to solve that equation. So if we look at this example, if I'm trying to find the length of leg WY, that's my hypotenuse. I have 39 degrees and I have the side adjacent to it. We know the cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and that's why we're using that trig ratio. So when we set up this equation, the cosine of 39 equals the 7.5 over the WY that I'm looking for. How do I solve for that? Basically, I'm cross multiplying. I'm making a proportion that the cosine over 1 equals 7.5 over my x. When I multiply that, I'm multiplying my x times my cosine 39 to equal my 7.5. And they kind of skip that step. So I'm going to go ahead and write that here. We're going to call this x because that's what I'm looking for. So I have x cosine 39 equals 7.5. And how do I solve for that? I divide each side of that equation by this cos 39. And that's how they get this problem here, that the x that I want is equal to the 7.5 divided by the cosine of 39. Notice that what you're kind of doing there is interchanging the two things that were cross-multiplied, the cos 39 and the x. And that's kind of an extra shortcut for you to solve. So to find my x, I want to take 7.5 divided by the cosine of 39 degrees. And that's just a number crunching exercise in your calculator. At that point, when you're ready to solve for x, you can go ahead and put that in your calculator of 7.5 divided by cos 39. And that's what's giving them the answer of about 9.65. We practiced just putting numbers in our calculator, making sure our mode was in degrees for the first couple of problems last week. Now we're going to take a look at how do I set up the problems to actually find missing lengths, which is what our whole purpose of looking at sines, cosine, and tangent ratios. If I want to find DE, that's my hypotenuse, I'm going to label that x. I notice what I have. I have a 27 degrees here. I have an opposite side. I'm looking for the hypotenuse. So I'm thinking about opposite and hypotenuse. As soon as I'm thinking about that opposite and hypotenuse, I'm going, oh, what do I want? Is that a SO, a CA, or a TOA? I have opposite and hypotenuse, so I want the sine. So I know that I'm going to set up my sine equal to my opposite over hypotenuse. Here's my 27 degrees. So my equation that I write is the sine of 27 degrees equals 18 over x. When I cross multiply, I get x times the sine of 27 equals 18. And again, in order to solve for my missing x, I divide each side by the sine of 27. Don't just go by 27. Sine 27 is a number, and it's definitely not going to be 27. So now in my calculator to find my x, all I have to do is type this in. So I want 18 divided by the sine of 27, and that gives me 39.648, which rounded to the nearest hundredth is 39.648. 0.65 meters. Again, notice this little shortcut. What did I do to solve this problem? It was like interchanging my x value and my sine 27 to divide. So this ended up being a division problem to solve. Zoom in a little bit more. If I look at question number 14, I want to find FH. So here's my x. I'm not using the hypotenuse at all. So if I'm looking at SO, CA, TOA, I don't want the h at all. I'm looking at TOA. So I'm looking at that tangent function equaling the opposite over the adjacent. Here's my 31 degrees. Opposite's the x, adjacent is 10. So as I set up that problem, I'm going to say that the tangent of 31 is equal to my opposite side x over my adjacent side 10. Notice that when I cross multiply, I get x equals 10 times the tangent of 31. So for this problem, it's a multiplication problem to solve. I have to set up my problem in my equation originally to figure out what it is I'm trying to do with that. So in my calculator, I want 10 times the tangent of 31, and I get 6.008 rounded to the nearest hundredth. My x will be 6.01 inches. If your mode's not in degrees, you will not get the right answers. If I look at question number 15, my question says to find the length of JK. So here's the x I'm looking for. Here's my angle of 18 degrees. So I notice I have an adjacent and a hypotenuse. When I look at adjacent and hypotenuse, that means I'm looking at the cosine function, CA, so CA TOA. So as I'm setting up this problem, I'm going to set it up as the cosine of 18 is equal to the adjacent side, the x that I'm looking for, over the 34.6 for my hypotenuse. Again, if I'm solving this problem, I can tell that my x will equal those two numbers multiplied together. So in order to find x, I want 34.6 times the cosine of 18. And that's just a number to punch in my calculator. Make sure that mode is in degrees. We set that up the very first thing. And I want 34.6 times the cosine of 18. And I end up with 32.906. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, that's 32.91, and I'm in millimeters. The last problem that we're looking on in this reteach I want to find the length of segment US. So there's my X. I notice where my angle is, 66 degrees. I notice I have an adjacent and I'm looking for an hypotenuse. So that adjacent hypotenuse means I'm going to be looking at the cosine function. That's so CA TOA, the CA part. So when I set up my problem, I'm going to be writing that I want the cosine of 66 degrees equal to my adjacent side, my 22.5, over the x that I'm looking for. In order to solve that, it's like interchanging those two that are going to be cross-multiplied. So to find my x, it will be 22.5 divided by the cosine of 66 degrees. I don't know whether to multiply or divide until I've set up my equation, but once I do, I can get my answer fairly quickly. So in my calculator, I want 22.5 divided by the cosine of 66, and I end up with the length of 55.318. So rounding that, 55.32. And this is in centimeters. So always set up your equation first. Figure out which function you need. Once you've set up your equation, cross multiply and solve for your missing side length.